Twilight aimed her pendant towards the door once more, gulping down the fear welling in her throat, pushing it open further. The room was even more open than the hallway she was in. If she had to guess it, it was at least the size of the banquet hall in Canterlot. She could see a fountain in the center of the room, showing a rusted pony standing triumphantly, wielding a tattered, broken fang. Twilight could only see the blood dripping from the creature. She followed the drip of the statue towards the ground, suddenly realizing that there was a stench in the room was coming from. The ground was littered with body parts. She could identify as several legs, chewed up torsos, various flattened organs, pools of blood, and at least one disemboweled head. At least if she was certain she looked and she could find another. She retreated immediately, falling into a sitting position and putting her back onto the wall. Her flanks cried out in pain as soon as she did, and she gritted her teeth, trying to ignore it. She'd rather be focusing on the pain than the horror show in the room behind her. It was all she could do to keep her stomach contents from rushing up out of her. "Oh, Celestia!" Twilight grimaced, shaking her head as trying to fight the tears forming at the edges of her eyes. "Why is this happening? What could have caused this?" She pictured her friends in her mind. Each body part in that room came an earth pony. Each of these ponies must have had friends, a family, other ponies they had loved and cared for. The thought didn't quite quell her stomach any. "I have to go in there," Twilight spoke to herself, putting a hoof to her mouth. Kerslip Boutique was upstairs, was at a dead end. There had been no way out and no way into the other rooms. The only place that she hadn't been able to check was behind the mural door. One of the mural pieces was trapped in unbreakable glass before her. If Stalingrad Library had been an indication of anything, it was that one of the pieces to unlock the door were obtainable. One just had to figure out where they were, and Twilight could feel it in her gut. The way had to get to the mural piece had been through that room. Her legs shook up as she stood again. She tried to steel her nerves and take in a deep breath of air, unpolluted by the wrenchiness of rotting flesh. She then carefully made her way open to the door. She wafting the stench of death and decay still spilling out from behind the doors. The moment in the air hit her nostrils, again she gagged. She put one hoof in front of the other, making it deeper in the suffocating room. She aimed her light towards the ground, spotting the other spaces between the discarded body parts and organs that lay scattered about. Her horn lit up and she grabbed several body parts and organs in front of her, and then she slowly moved them to the side, clearing a path for her to walk without stepping on anything. The stained stone floor was cold despite the repulsion in the air. It sent shivers up her back as she made her way through. Twilight lifted her head towards the fountain, once more looking at the statue of the pony. She glanced slowly to her left, trying to discern where she needed to go. Her light fell upon the small wooden door in the leftmost wall. Of course she could reach it if she maneuvered enough that death lay around her. Twilight carefully lifted her hoof and tried to take a blind step. Something squishing underneath. She instantly grimaced, not wanting to see what she had just stepped into, but she could already feel the compulsion to look rising. She lifted her hoof and looked. It appeared to be a squished remains of an eyeball. Yep, there weren't even a bit of breakfast that she had that morning. The unicorn coughed against the bile that had escaped from her mouth, still feeling the burning in the back of her throat. She then shook her head, trying to clear out the vile thoughts that caused her to lose her stomach in the first place. She wanted to break down and cry, just to collapse onto the horrible mess that she found herself in. Her medallion sprang to life, telling her that it wouldn't be the best time for it. A dull thud combined with the squealing came to her ears. She then turned her around, directing her light towards the source. Something struck against the ground, picking up and discarding the leg with it. The leg that had been lifted into the air, and a loud smacking echoed as the limb slowly disappeared between the folds around its mouth. The mouth appeared to be at the top of the creature's head, followed in a long neck to a large, engorged body that had seemed to be slivered against the ground. Twilight thought enough it had a pony-like shape, but it was missing any semblance of a legs or a pony head. It had been was like a leech, slithering across the ground, twice the size of her, devouring what meant was on the ground. The massive creature was sliding closer, though through the blood and organs, crushing anything that didn't slide out of the way when it moved. Its mouth came down, blindly clamped down to another piece of body of bloody meat that might choke it down its long gullet. Twilight then turned its back towards the wooden door she was heading for and lit her horn. With a wave of her magic, all of the various pony parts slid out of her way as she ran. Her hooves hammered against the floor, almost slipped on fresh blood, but it stayed on her legs and made it to the door. She flung the door open and threw herself inside before slamming the door shut behind her. Her medallion grew silent as she panted heavily. The stench of death wasn't suffocating her in the room, though the smell of blood was still wafted through. She took a moment to examine her surroundings. The room was small, enclosed in the room with all four walls, probably no bigger than the average room. What stood out was the wall on the entire opposite side had been painted with a large picture depicting of the army of ponies, being led by Princess Celestia. All of the ponies, even Celestia, were in a clad thick of looking armor that covered most of their bodies. She could see all kinds of ponies standing behind her, although they seemed to have been sorted in groups. She could see a section of earth ponies, sections of unicorns next to them, in the air a group of pegasi, and underneath the picture was a plague with elegant writing on it. Twilight drew closer to the picture, inspecting the details on this strange mural. It wasn't the one that she had seen in Canterlot Art Museum or a book on historical art. As far as she knew, she wasn't any depiction of any equestrian major battles. Her eyes were drawn down towards the plague. Through our combined power can defeat a threat that may come to harm our lands and loved ones. We will always stand out from those around us. Twilight thought the words on the plague sounded weird. She thought of it back to the pictures in Canterlot. If this had been the picture, the plague would have said something like, "Through our combined power, we can defeat any threat that may come to harm our land or loved ones." However, this part made to point to indicate that the different ponies meant something specific. Her instincts told her that something was off about the picture, something that she needed to figure out. Now, if she was going to get out of this crazy other world, her eyes scanned across the picture once more. Viewing Celestia in all of her glory, she didn't examine the massive army that was behind her. She looked in the group of earth ponies first. They all seemed about the same color, and there was a small variation in color, but nothing that seemed to stand out. She raised a hoof and took a closer look, examining each other. Their armor and their color, and their weapon of choice was their wings. "Wait, wings?" Twilight said, looking at where her hoof was. The group of earth ponies, most visibly, were having a pair of wings that were attached to the side of the pony. It was a Pegasus in the middle of the earth ponies. Her hoof touched in the strange outfit of misfit ponies of the group when it suddenly moved. The Pegasus sunk into the picture about half an inch. Twilight moved her hoof away, and she hadn't seen an outline of that to push something into the wall. She then looked at the Pegasus among the earth ponies and thought about it for a moment. As if there was a pony that was mismatched, then Twilight swept her eyes over to the group of unicorns in the picture. She scanned across the rows for ponies, checking each of them with her horn until she found the exact same pony that she was looking for. Amongst the unicorns was a single earth pony. She then raised her hoof and pushed against the outcast. The part of the wall pushing it into place was like the first one she did. Scanning upwards, she looked over the flying Pegasi, who seemed to bolt out of the sky over the army below. She carefully examined each one until she found the unusual one. The unicorn amongst the Pegasi. She lit her horn and used her magic to push through against the pony, and he too sunk into the wall. The free sections pressed in Twilight, and she took a step back, not sure of what to expect. The picture was fine just for a moment, before it suddenly let off a small glow. Twilight was confused by the sight as the glow grew brighter. She then covered her eyes as light filled the entire room. As the light began to fade and she lowered her foreleg from her face and viewed at what had happened, she found out that she was no longer in the room staring at the picture, but instead she was in a regular hallway staring once more at the figures of Celestia and Merlin. Though Foshaft cannot find the accommodations are quite relaxing, the regal princess spoke with the air of kindness behind her voice. We've already had the guards prepare your room, those close to the royal archives, so you may conduct the research. I cannot express my gratitude in a fine number of words, Merlin spoke oppressively. The kindness, though, has showed me far extends of what any I would expect. It is simply a part of our nature. That's what gives us the true power, what comes from one of those elements. The element of kindness. Celestia smiled at the obscure unicorn. If not for that, we would extend this kindness to thee anyway. We have received word from our guards that they'll be bring in the Antrinola soon. And just as Defu said, he is but an earth pony now. But I am a pony that has brought it upon himself to no lie. Merlin nodded his head slowly. Nor did I lie about why I needed any resources for my study. I shall be able to save my pony if my research proves fruitful. And we have no doubt in your ability, Celestia spoke warmly. Come in. We wish to give you a tour around the castle before you retire to the room for the night. Tour from the Fee Princess herself? I could think of no higher honor. Merlin smiled, accepting the gift. Your Majesty, a loud voice suddenly cried out from the both of them. The two looked around to see a rather poorly looking unicorn with a white coat, dark blue mane walking towards them. She was adorned with a rather expensive suit, made by a rare skill silks and thread, adorned with the jewels and bleeding in showing his status in the castle. The coat he wore over the suit that had its ends carried by two humbled, thin servant dressed uniform. Your Majesty, I must simply have the audience with thee. The plump unicorn stopped in short of the royal princess. He did not bother with the bows or formal greetings. He just began to spoke his needs first. And the land, though, has given me is no longer enough to carry my needs. The discovery of a gem mine has expanded, needs a pony's work, and I must simply have more land so that I can accommodate them. He snorted with the uncaring attitude, as if he didn't really care about the ponies living on his lands, but rather about the gems on those lands that had contained. Is they thy work no force of quantuit? Thy land is rich with no ponies, who will work with the sweat of their brows and food on their bellies. We have no doubt of the strength and will of our citizens. Why, though, will you ask for more? The princess raised an eyebrow, unconvinced by his argument. The flying pony just looked shocked and appalled, as if the very idea of having his request disputed in the situs was unheard of. Although even while addressing the new ruler of the land, he appeared to be only want what seemed to be believed what's his. Your Princess Majesty Celestia, I do not think that thou truly knowest the thy citizens. The plump pony adjusted his suit and cleared his throat. They are often lazy, and can only think of their own selfish desires. They wish to bleed me dry of my wealth, and I rightfully accord that you know not in their place. Many refuse to work in generous hours I gave them, and more mines that are found each week. With such lazy ponies, I do not have the ample workforce to make Equestria as a whole lot richer. He stated as a matter of factity, lifting his head into the air and closing his eyes. Celestia eyed him for a moment, almost unable to believe that he was being serious with her. She let out a discontent sigh and turned to face Merlin. Our apologies, dear Merlin. It appears that once again our duties must subordinate to the business which we would like to conduct. She gave a soft nod. We hope that you are not disappointed. Do not think upon it for a minute longer. Merlin waved his hoof gently. I cannot begin to fathom that the life must be alike, and understand that my country comes first. He gave her a comforting smile. See thy people, and we shall meet again later. With that, Merlin turned around and began to walk off in the hallway. As I was saying, Your Majesty, you must simply give me the land I request. The plump, noble pony began to speak again. However, his words began to drown out as the images started to fade. The hallway was no more as it faded back to the room with the mural, leaving Twilight once more in a state of confusion. The lavender unicorn gave her head a soft shake before rubbing it gently, trying to think about the events that she had just seen. Well, there's no doubt about my mind now, Twilight spoke softly, staring at the mural. The depiction of the Princess Celestia leading the army behind her. These are the memories of Princess Celestia. Twilight pondered that for a moment. She was seeing more memories of her mentor, the ruler of Equestria. She was viewing them in the same way that she had viewed her own memories when Celestia had cast her mind to dwell a spell upon her. I wonder, Twilight said. She put a hoof in her chin and thought. Pinkie and Fluttershy each had said they had experienced some memories of their past when I put them under the Mind Dwell spell, and I have confirmed that's what I saw in the princess. However, I experienced that what they experienced were vastly different. Am I viewing the memories of the princess and experiencing this town because of the mind-dwelling spell? She tried to rack her brain for explanation. That would make sense. I'm the only pony in this town that casts a spell or even knows about it. There are no copies of the dream's psychological understanding in Ponyville. The only other possible pony who would have cast a spell is... Her heart began to instantly sink. The creator of the very spell was in town. She had left her number and one assistant in care. No, that's stupid, Twilight. She shook her head. She then had nothing to do with this. You were just jumping into conclusions. Other ponies borrow that book, right? It was in a book in the library after all. She rubbed her head, trying to remember if any pony had borrowed the book at any point. I can't possibly keep a track of all the books rented out in the library, can I? Maybe someone had borrowed it while I wasn't looking, or when I wasn't studying it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's it. She suppressed the feelings, trying to swallow them in her stomach. I know. I'll talk with Magus again when I get out of here. He'll explain everything, and I'll prove that he had nothing to do with this. And if it wasn't as wrong for me to leave Spike in his care... Twilight then nodded her head, doing her best to convince herself. I just need to get out of here first. She then murmured, looking down at the floor before the mural. A brown tile that seemed to have appeared just below the mural. She then lit her horn up and grabbed it, bringing it up to her eyes. She swerved around down quickly and carefully got a good look at it. It wasn't very big, a small square tile. On the front of it was a depiction of an earth pony. I guess this is one of those tiles that will have to be up for that monster above, Twilight spoke out loud, placing the tile into her magic pool. She then turned her face to the room once more, almost gulping at the realization that she was about to have to go back outside to the massive room of decay, where the body parts were being devoured that leech-like creature. She took a deep breath and opened the door once more. The overwhelming air assaulted her senses with vengeance, and as she stepped out into the room, her medallion instantly began to buzz. She searched for the source. Her light hit the leech just a little ways out. Closer to the middle of the room, she was gorging itself upon more limbs and discarded ponies that didn't have to seem to notice that she was there. She turned to her left and decided that she'd follow along the wall, figuring she could find the next area she would need to go quickly to avoid that horrible abomination. Her horn lit up as she quickly began to walk while pushing out the pieces of her path. The room was only about the size of the grand hall back in Canterlot. Twilight knew she could circle around the room in just a few minutes if she kept focusing on her goal. Her medallion suddenly began to buzz louder, and the sound of the metal scraping against the stone that just came from above her. She stopped and turned around and looked up, the light on her pendant landing upon the masked creature once more. Its head had aimed at her, each leg striking into the cold stone wall underneath it. It was climbing along the side of the wall, straight in her direction. The lavender unicorn didn't wait till it got closer for what may end up doing. She then turned onto her hooves and began to run. She turned for the wall that she had been walking towards, pushing the discarded organs out of her way in her bid to flee. She heard the metal scraping hit the ground and a loud snap echo from behind her. The scraping then began to click rapidly on the ground, as if though the creature was now scurrying towards her. It was chasing her. She swept carefully back and forth and rapidly in a panic, trying to find a door that would lead her to another room and hopefully her escape. Each scraping click of the metal was punctuated with the echo behind her. The creature began to gang on her. Her eyes fell upon another wooden door, similar to the one that she had entered with the mural. She ran straight for it, and the metal scraping grew louder, and the creature slammed its blade-like legs onto the ground with each step. Her horn lit up, and she seized the door with her magic. A burning pain suddenly seared out her flank, and she cried out a pain of agony. One of the sharp blades of the creature's legs had reached out to try to get her, ultimately missing, but managed to slice her along with her first skin as it went. Twilight flung the door open and stepped inside. Sliding across the door, she whirled her head and slammed the door shut. Her medallion grew silent, and the sound of scraping metal against the stone stopped. The unicorn panted heavily, watching the doors, expecting to see a sharpened leg right through the wood or through the door just to get burst off its hinges. She just sat there in the new room for several minutes, just observing the door and waiting. For whatever reason, the creature didn't seem to be following her, but her medallion was silent, meaning that they weren't nearby or trying to get inside. It seemed as though as soon as she entered the room, they had simply forgotten about her presence. With her heart still beating and the room had gone deathly silent, she turned her head and looked at the burning gash that had appeared on her flank. It was a long cut, though it didn't seem to be very deep. She examined it carefully, noticing that it was slowly dripping blood. She would even fought a creature with the blades for legs, would have been able to do more damage. But it seems that it only nicked her with one of its end legs, and she had ran away. She hoped the bleeding would soon stop on its own, and for once she was grateful that it was her own blood on her body and not some pony else's. She just hadn't accounted for that like the rest of her injuries that she had been sustained. The simple burns on her flanks didn't seem so important anymore by comparison. Not everything out to kill her. She turned herself around, putting the back of her door so that she could examine the room that she had now found herself in. The first thing her eyes fell upon were the two ragged old seats that sat in the middle of the room. They were large and made of gold, and though they showed their age and how unkempt they had become, the backs and the seats were now made of red material, most likely silk of some kind that had been torn apart by the passage of time and eaten by moths. Their edges were worn in gems and were no longer carried in their luster. A long red carpet that led from the door to the thrones, covered in dirt and grime. Sitting between the thrones was a small marble pillar with a plague on it. "This is a throne room?" Twilight asked. Confused and scanning her light over to the chairs, she made a note to check the rest of the room for anything out of the ordinary. Her light had swept along most of the wall and just saw an unusual lever just jutting out from it. She then turned her head, and then she saw the rightmost wall ever so jutting out. Curious as to the levers that lay around the room, she walked closer to the thrones and the pillar that had been between them. There was nothing really on top of the pillar, though, and it only came up to the height of their chest. But the plague on it bore words, and another puzzle she assumed was another one. One by one, we would help the citizens of our country, and though we could help the most, there were times where just one of us was just not enough. Only with our powers combined, we could accomplish our goals. With our powers combined, Twilight rubbed a hoof against her chin and thought. She then turned to once more to look at the levers that stood out from the opposite ends of the wall. No, it couldn't be that easy, could it? She murmured to herself in disbelief. She trotted over to the lever on the wall and placed a hoof against it. She then turned and shined her light onto the lever on the opposite end of the room. With it in her sight, she lit up her room and her horn and rapped the lever for within their magic. She then began to short countdown in her head. 3, 2, 1. She then pulled down with her hoof with the magic at the same time, flipping both the switches in the room simultaneously. For a moment, nothing seemed to have happened. Twilight was about ready to draw the conclusions that needed to be so easy. However, just one of those thoughts crossed her mind. Suddenly, the light began to glow in the middle of the room. And the main thing that was the case is steady and growing bigger. She then raised her hoof to cover her eyes from the glow until it began to die down. When she moved her hoof back down, she wasn't in a throne room anymore, but rather in an adorned bedroom. It has been over a month now, dear sister. You cannot tell us that you have not found peace with the stallion, Celestia spoke, as she stared at the room carefully, using a brush to sweep up and down her delicate coat. Normally a servant would be tasked to do with this chore to keep her coat looking luxurious, but the princess found comfort in having a rare moment to appease herself, just to do as she wished. And what could be wrong with us still reserving our judgment? Luna huffed across the room, raising her head and closing her eyes. It was not as if truly earned this place in her castle. Though you know that's not true, Celestia chuckled, turning to face her and her sister, placing a brush down upon the desk. This stallion has died our country and served our magic court, and he has brought new riches, and they were to be dried up. Why can't though you appreciate him? Luna was silent, what seemed to be thinking over her sister's words, turning to look back at the mirror before her. He just hasn't had it, that's all. We have no reason to believe in anything that he is a braggart, Murrin the braggart. Luna huffed again, and turning around to face her sister. We do not think, though, they are telling us the whole truth. Celestia looked at her sister, knowingly with a soft grin on her face. We think our dear sister is hiding something. We shall not hide anything. Luna almost slammed a hoof against the desk she sat up. This stallion may not rot in his studies for all we care. Celestia couldn't help but grin and walked over to her sister, looking over at the dark mare's shoulder, seeing her cheeks brighter than normal. Though fantasies the bee stallion, Celestia couldn't help but put a laugh on her face. Luna turned to her sister with a look of utter shock and disbelief. Her face contorted, unable to believe in those words that had just come out of her sister's lips. She had muttered and gasped out words that they refused to escape her lips, only coming out as garbled nonsense. We cannot believe it. Our dear sister in love, Celestia laughed, turning to walk away from her sister, unable to have a serious say upon this revolution. What, though, you know about love? Luna almost raged, standing up with her whole face turning bright red. We could think as it though who has a crush on the stallion, though you are protecting any thoughts onto us. Celestia let out a roar of laughter as she fell to the ground, unable to stand on her hind legs anymore. Sister, such disgraceful behavior! Luna gasped at the shock of display. Oh, forgive us, dear sister. Celestia still laughed, wiping a tear that formed at the edge of her eye. Our dear sister has always been such an air of seriousness about her. To think that she would find a stallion desirable, let alone be embarrassed to admit such as though it had not crossed our minds. Celestia lay on her hooves, still shuffling from her laughter. Luna huffed loudly, turning her head away from her sister, still red in the face. So we're not allowed to enjoy any love? We're not allowed to express marehood fantasies? Luna almost growled as she closed her eyes. But we are a princess, after all. Our loyalty duty will always hold weight of any life we chose to have in private. Celestia's laughter finally quieted down to a couple of chuckles as she stood up on her hooves, smiling at her sister who had sat back down, looking at herself in the mirror. Now, dear sister, though we say no words, smiled brightly, walking over to her sister. Thy laughter spoke enough, carrying them words to our true place upon the throne. Luna glared at herself in the mirror as her face began to calm down. Celestia walked up behind the dark mare and wrapped her head around her shoulder, gently nuzzling her. So, sister, Luna spoke in shock. If though you are truly in love with though have our blessings, Celestia smiled, we will be overjoyed to see our dearest sister happy. Though are much anyway serious and always matters in the Vi hooves as personal. We all should have though laughter inside, though aids with the elements. We could just see this side more. The word spoke, true, and Luna knew it. Her sister wasn't exactly making fun of her. It was just her way of pretending herself. The Princess of Night let out a disgruntled sigh as she had to let go of the frustration she was feeling towards her elder sister. Though she should not expect anything to come to this. We are a princess, and a stallion is at a court mage, and an exceptional court mage who has aided our lives, but a court mage nevertheless is expected, nay demanded, that if we should have ourselves to a suitor, that should be a noble garners for our attention. Luna closed her eyes and resigning to herself in such a fate. Dear sister, we are founders and monarchs on our land, and as if to expected us to garner the attention of noble, then we are simply must make the ones we desired into a noble. Celestia devilishly grinned. Luna did she look at her older sister in surprise. If we must play by the rules of our land, then we too must play by the rules given to us. The words are bold and dear sister, though lasses through this before. Luna softly glared at her sister suspiciously. We always must be on edge of our hooves, if we are to rule the countries with integrity. The Princess of the Sun smiled, before beginning to walk away from her sister. The night shall befall upon us soon, and we would like to adjourn to the evening. Sleep well, dear sister, and always keep our words close to heart, Celestia said as she exited out of the room. Luna looked as if though she were about to say something else, but if there were more words to this conversation, they were not meant to be heard. The bedroom just began to fade away, returning to the room as it once been before. Reality came back to the darkened, destroyed throne room. Twilight then blinked for a moment, standing on her hooves, and though once more. Princess Luna had a crush on Merlin? The idea amused her a little. The bookworm that she had met in Canterlot archives certainly seemed confident, but picturing her with actual love interest seemed a bit weird. She could only imagine the gravity of the situation. After all, even today, if one of the princesses had found love, it would be big news all over Equestria. All in the same time under the princess as her personal protege. She hadn't had seen or heard a single thing about the princess falling in love. Not a single thing. Twilight then spoke out loud for herself to hear. It was beginning to dawn upon her that she had never seen the princess take romantic interest in any pony. Not to say that she was any better, but certainly hadn't taken any time out of her studies for romantic interests. But she did held the romantic idea in her heart that she would find just the right stallion one day, and that one that shared her love of books, studying, one that she could spend long nights just reading together, sharing thoughts, opinions, and theories. She never once had heard such details from the princess. The princess was always attending to her loyal duties and having so much to take care of throughout the entire land. Certainly she had advisors, and she had several consuls, and she was well versed in the laws, but she had no put in place. But Twilight was almost never saw her but in personal time for her, when she had the little time to take out, as almost as always interrupted by some other important royal duty. I guess I never realized how much, though tough the princess had it. Twilight then murmured to herself. She had known the princess had it tough, but she never put two pieces together until now. Now she was starting to feel guilty at finding the idea of Princess Luna in love funny. Both the princesses deserved to be happy, and she knew it. They just never had the time for it. Twilight looked around the room, escaping from her thoughts for a moment. Her eyes came back to look at the marble pillar once more. Noticing that something appeared on it, she lit up a horn and grabbed a hold of them, levitating over to herself, and it was another brown square tile, though this one had a depiction of a Pegasus on it. I guess it's my reward for solving the riddle, Twilight said, as she put the magic alongside with the other tile and she grabbed it. Though this was really an easy puzzle, she then looked at it once more at the downward towards the levers. She just had automatically assumed that she needed to pull them both at the same time. After all, the riddle had made sense both together in order to make anything work to be accomplished. She put a hoof onto her chin and thought about it. No, this puzzle was only easy because I was a unicorn. She quickly realized, if I was an earth pony or a Pegasus, how would I have gotten to the opposite of this room in time to pull them down at the same time? I can use magic. Any other pony would have had to found it some other way. She realized how the advantages have been for a unicorn, and not just any unicorn, but the one that spent her life studying magic. None of her friends had the luxury right now, and she was again reminded of what she was working towards. Why she was going to go through this determined world into which she now found herself in.